Hi, and welcome to Therapy Thursdays with Carla Korn. I am a psychotherapist in Agora Hills, California, also working online with clients all over the states of both California and New York. And I help women to break the cycle of disordered eating and body hatred. So that is my primary passion. And this afternoon, I wanted to talk about some skills that are pretty specific to how you can break the binge-purge cycle in bulimia recovery. If you are someone who is struggling with bulimia, you're probably familiar with what I'm talking about. But if you're not, just a brief overview of what exactly is bulimia. So when people are struggling with bulimia, this is an eating disorder that is characterized by what we have are episodes of binging, so uncontrollable eating or a feeling of being out of control, eating large amounts of food or kind of more than what would be considered normal, although it's kind of less important about really what it is or how much, the feelings of shame that follow. And then what characterizes bulimia and what sets it apart from something like binge eating disorder is that with bulimia, you have these episodes, these compensatory methods that follow. So typically people think with bulimia of self-induced vomiting, but there's other things that constitute that, and that could be laxative use, also compulsive over-exercise as a way to sort of rid yourself of the food. There's some more things that I don't need to get into right now, but basically the compensatory methods. So what are we talking about when we talk about the binge-purge cycle in bulimia? And if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat. If you don't feel comfortable, which I can definitely understand, you can always contact me after the fact and ask me some questions. And so the cycle, what we're talking about is these episodes of binging, like we just talked about, the purging or some other compensatory method that follows, and then we have what typically happens, which are these sort of diet behaviors or more restrictive eating patterns that emerge right after that. So that's the cycle that we're talking about. And if you're in the cycle, you know that it can feel really helpless, and you can feel really, really stuck. So I want to talk about, why is it so hard to break the cycle? Well, one of the reasons it's so hard is that these, this may have started small. It becomes more common. Usually these episodes become recurrent and become more frequent for people. And then what happens over time is we sort of wire our brain to respond in this way. So over time, it becomes just a way that people develop to manage their discomfort. And it becomes almost routine. I've heard it described as sort of having an addictive quality. If that is how you experience it, it can definitely feel that way because you feel a compulsion to binge and then to purge, to have that release, and then driven right back into the restriction that follows. So the reason why it's so hard to break is because of the way that our brains become wired, and the way that these behavioral patterns sort of set in. So what can we do to try to break out of the cycle? And I'm just going to share a few tips. I share more of them in my blog, and I'll drop the blog link to the blog post into the comments so you have access to that. And so one of the things you can do to try to get ahead of this or out of this cycle is, like we talked about, or like I just talked about, you have the restrictive eating tendencies. So as I've spoken about previously in my videos, specifically around binge eating disorder, one of the surest predictors that a binge is going to take place is actually at the other end with the restriction. So that is all of this diet mentality, the resolution the next day to start over, to get back on the wagon, to eat cleanly, whatever we're calling it. It's restriction. And so basically what happens is the binge is the body's normal biological response to being withheld food. And so at that point, there's kind of like very little that can get in front to stop the binge. You know, at that point, your body needs food, and that's why you feel so out of control. This is a biologically driven urge. Okay, so I think people oftentimes miss out on that. And so one of the easiest ways you can try to address this pattern in bulimia is to try to normalize meals. And this can be difficult at first when you've been perhaps not responding to hunger cues and eating past this sense of fullness. So it can take time to retrain your body to eat food that is like normally what it needs to function. Okay, so that's like the primary thing you can do is normalizing meals. That's like the first step. And then one of the second things that I like to talk about with people is using mindfulness as like a go-to first coping skill. So the whole idea behind these binge purge episodes is you're trying to avoid uncomfortable feelings. You may not know that that's what's going on, but over time, this has become your way of managing uncomfortable feelings. So what mindfulness does is it counteracts that by taking you into the here and now. And, you know, sometimes people get kind of intimidated by mindfulness. They feel like they have to develop some really extensive meditative practice or something like that, and it can be that's where people can kind of shy away from it. But all you really need to know about mindfulness is that you're making an effort to take yourself into the here and now. And so you're using your senses to be aware of what's going on in your body. And you can also do what's called urge surfing. So with urge surfing, it's just you're making an attempt to ride the emotion that you're having, just like you know, you would. I'm not a surfer, so I feel kind of funny using this analogy sometimes. But the idea is that the emotion, just like a wave, is going to pass. So sometimes when we're in these uncomfortable states, it feels like the emotion is permanent, and it feels like it's going to be there forever. And the reality is that no emotion is permanent. They're going to pass. So you can show yourself that you can actually be with the discomfort. You can be mindful. You can notice how you're feeling, and you can have this awareness that eventually it's going to pass. And when it does, what you're doing is you're showing yourself and you're retraining your brain to understand that it can withstand the discomfort. And so, you know, that's how mindfulness can kind of come in. You know, I often talk to people also about just making a plan to delay the binge. And so you can make a plan that I'm going to try to stave off the binge for maybe 5 minutes this time. And in that time period, you can make a list, plan ahead of some go-to coping skills that you can draw on in that moment. And they don't have to be complicated. They can just be, what are some coping skills you can use? Well, it's a process of trial and error for everyone, but some things like getting up, taking a walk around the block, removing yourself from the place where the binge takes place, from the kitchen, that can make all the difference. You know, maybe you can turn on a TV show you really like that is going to distract you from that urge. You can sit down and paint your nails. You can read a book. You can basically make a list. There's like extensive amounts of things that you can do. And so the idea is that you're going to make a plan to try like 3 to 5 things. And, you know, if those don't work at first, you can always go back to the drawing board and come up with some more coping skills. All you're doing is saying that I'm going to delay the binge, and first, you know, that binge purge behavior, it's always there for you. You've had it, you know, in your life for a long time. It served a purpose. But all you're saying is, I know what's going to happen if I go down that road. First, I'm going to try something different, and here are some things I can try. So sometimes if you use like the mindfulness first to kind of try to take yourself out of that state of feeling like someone else is in charge of your body and it's kind of happening without your control, that can be like a good first step. And then you can try some of these coping skills. Okay, so just wanted to share a couple of quick things this afternoon. Like I mentioned, I have some more tips in my blog, and I will drop the link into the comments. Because there's definitely, a lot of different things you can try, and it's a process of trial and error. And so the last thing that I always talk about is just the fact that no one deserves to go through this process alone. Everyone deserves to have support. Support can be a really great thing if you have people in your life that know what's going on with you and that you feel comfortable being open with. You can turn to your supports when you feel triggered. You can text a friend. You can call somebody and say, hey, I feel like I'm having an urge to binge and purge right now. Sometimes just saying it out loud can kind of take you out of that state, because part of what drives the eating disorder is the secretiveness. And the last thing that I always mention is that professional support is really, really important. The support of an eating disorder therapist, also a dietitian, and a full team of support. So I have some spots available in my practice in Agora Hills, California, also working online in California and New York. Please reach out if you want to schedule a free consultation and find out how I might be able to help. And have a good rest of your afternoon. Bye, everyone.